Major funding for this program was provided by the state of Colorado.
There could be an energy crisis at any moment, and it's beyond our control.
There still are people in the country who choose between heating and eating.
Here in the U.S., we are literally burning our resources.
I don't think we spend enough time asking what kind of society we really want.
God's really blessed this country. We are the most efficient producing country in the world.
American agriculture is self-destructive because it is self-deceptive.
The difference between a farmer and a pigeon today is that a pigeon can still make a deposit on a John Deere.
If we don't take and change our farming styles, we're going to be killing our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren.
In the price of food, we don't see the true human cost, the energy cost, the topsoil that is being lost. In other words, the price is deceiving us.
Agriculture is going to have to change, and it's going to use less energy.
There's something simple and elemental about planting a tiny seed and then nurturing it into a mature plant, then savoring the fruits of its harvest. But the way we grow food in America today is anything but simple. Tonight, we're going to see how American agriculture, like all aspects of modern society, has been transformed radically by technology. The farm has become a kind of factory, highly productive, highly mechanized, and highly energy intensive. Food itself has become an industrial product aimed at markets across the country and around the world. Take this potato. These days we're likely to eat it in quite a different form, as French fries from a fast food restaurant or a bag of chips from the grocery store. The energy it took to produce this humble potato chip for planting, growing, harvesting, processing, packaging, shipping, and storage is over 10 times the energy I might derive from eating it. And what's true for the chip is true for most of the highly processed food we eat. Food production accounts for nearly a fifth of the nation's total energy use, almost all in the form of fossil fuels. That's the equivalent of almost 100 billion gallons of oil a year. From tillage to table, America's food system is totally dependent on non-renewable energy.
If we used all of the known petroleum reserves strictly to produce food, no petroleum used for transportation, heating, cooling, and so forth, but just to produce food, to feed the world population on our diet using our agricultural technology, the world's known petroleum reserves would last a mere 12 years.
It hasn't always been like this. Only 100 years ago, 90% of the energy used to produce food came from renewable sources.
If you bend down and cut out the houses back there, create an illusion, so to speak, you will see a former reality. This is what the settler saw and put the plow to, feeling it was his purpose to break this sod. Some said it sounded like the opening of a zipper. We opened the country with muscle power. the muscle of the horse, the muscle of the mule, and the muscle of the human.
For most of our short history, we've been a nation of farmers. In the early years, we owned small farms, grew a variety of crops in rotation, and raised our own livestock. What we didn't need ourselves, we brought to market in the towns and cities nearby. The resources we needed for farming were always close at hand. As we moved westward, we began to farm on a larger scale. With new gasoline-powered machines, we could turn the vast plains into a limitless breadbasket and ship the harvest to eastern markets. When World War I reduced European harvests, America responded by plowing up 55 million acres for wheat to feed our hungry friends.
We turned under millions of new acres for war wheat. We had the manpower. We invented new machinery. The world was our market.
The land seemed inexhaustible, but in our eagerness to increase yields, we paid too little attention to replenishing the soil. The Great Dust Bowl of the 1930s badly damaged over 50 million acres and forced tens of thousands of farmers off the land. Congress at last declared soil conservation a national priority and authorized massive reclamation projects. In time, the plains became productive again. The advent of World War II and the technology it spawned transformed the face of American agriculture more dramatically than ever before.
This country was really geared up to produce a tremendous amount of machinery, trucks, tanks, guns, whatever that were used in the war. That industry was set up to continue to produce something, and it needed a consumer to consume machines. Agriculture was wide open field.
In just a few decades, we retired 25 million draft animals and over 20 million farm workers and replaced them with engine power. The machines could do the work faster and more efficiently. Besides, with the price of gasoline so low, it seemed cheaper to pump oil than to use human labor and grow feed for draft animals.
Not only has agriculture miraculously increased yields to feed more people, fewer farmers and bigger machines have kept pace. Great new harvesting systems and distribution methods had to be developed to bring these crops from faraway farms fresh to our tables. Through imagination and hard-won knowledge, through science and technology, agriculture works newer and newer miracles.
Increased agricultural research after the war brought other benefits as well, including new high-yield plants and a variety of new petrochemical fertilizers, insecticides, and herbicides.
As the chemical industry and fertilizer industry developed and companies would call on you and we could see the results that fertilizers would have on the yields, we did try the fertilizers.
Came into farming not knowing anything about the crops that I'm going to raise, particularly oranges. And within a few years, I was growing oranges like everybody else. I had the recommended rates of fertilizer, the recommended rates of pesticides, of herbicides, even water moisture devices were all recommended to me by the Ag Extension Office or the University of California Research Department of Agriculture. So that really we didn't have to have any knowledge to get into farming to understand how to farm successfully or to farm with chemicals.
And what the government's role has been and will continue to be, I'd say number one has been our research role, and the fact that our land-grant universities, our experiment stations, and then our extension service transmitting what we've learned through research to farmers to produce more efficiently.
Agricultural research in colleges, industry, and government goes forward. Result, new products, new businesses, more jobs.
Energy was cheap then, it was efficient, and it was effective, cost-effective, and it produced a tremendous amount of food.
The tremendous increases in productivity achieved by intensive farming have been paid for by even larger increases in the use of fossil fuels. Between 1950 and 1980, yield per acre doubled, while fuel consumption more than quadrupled. With the help of heavy federal subsidies, large-scale irrigation projects in California and other western states opened up millions of acres once considered unsuitable for farming. Today, 15% of all U.S. cropland is irrigated. Other subsidies help build a strong nationwide transportation system. Today, more than 40% of the nation's fruits and vegetables comes from California alone.
As a consequence of essentially hot wiring the American landscape to produce higher yields, we drained it. We sucked on it. Our bottom line was production, and the model we had available was mass production. We didn't pay attention to the fact that this more approach came at the expense of the future, and ultimately energy began to substitute for people. We began to close our rural schools and our rural churches and our rural baseball. And there was this exodus to the cities.
The number of farms today is only a third of what it was at the turn of the century. Much of our agricultural land has been consolidated into vastly larger, more productive farms, using highly mechanized, energy-intensive farming and marketing methods. Almost 3/4 of all farm income is earned by just 5% of the nation's largest farms.
Instead of farmers producing enough food for 5 or 6 people, like they did in the 20s, farmers are now producing enough food for themselves and something like 80 other people today. And all of that has been brought about to a large degree through farmers' ability to use technology and to use energy.
The Harris Ranch, a 15,000-acre enterprise in the San Joaquin Valley of California, is a model of today's successful agribusiness.
Well, this farm was started in 1937 by my father, who came out and started drilling wells out here and growing cotton and grain. And over the years, we've expanded it, and now we're raising about a dozen different crops, all the way from cotton to canning tomatoes to lettuce and broccoli and carrots. We employ about 150 people or so on the farm. And we also have a cattle feed yard that we have an average of about 80,000 cattle on feed that we buy from all over California and the West. And we have our own beef processing facility that we process the cattle at, and we sell to grocery stores throughout California and sell some beef to Japan. And so we're just always looking at how best to market a product and see how we can get the most return.
The development of food processing and refrigerated shipping decreased our reliance on regional and seasonal food supplies. Such developments allow super farms like the Harris Ranch to have customers anywhere around the world. But shipping adds significantly to energy costs.
Take a head of lettuce, for example. It's produced in California and has to be shipped to New York State. A head of lettuce contains about only 50 calories of food energy. To raise that head of lettuce in California using irrigation requires about 400 calories of energy, and then to ship that head of lettuce all the way from California to New York State would require another 1,800 calories of energy.
We now have a national food distribution system that is becoming increasingly international as more and more products are coming to New York and other cities from all over the world, providing consumers with year-round availability.
The variety of produce available today has had a noticeable effect on what we eat. A more radical shift in eating habits has occurred because of changes in lifestyle and the wider availability of processed foods. In today's busy world, we're looking for convenience and ease of preparation, About 75% of the average American diet consists of processed food.
So eat it, just eat it. I don't care if you're full, just eat it. Eat it. Open up your mouth and feed it. Have some more yogurt, have some more Spam. It doesn't matter if it's fresh or canned, just eat it. Eat it. Don't you make me repeat it.
The cost of these changes has been a staggering increase in our consumption of energy. The protein we derive from beef, for example, takes at least 25 times more energy to produce than a comparable amount of protein from grain. And twice as much energy is spent on processing and packaging as for growing our food. The industrialization of our food system has had another effect on us as consumers by isolating us from the land and from the people who are its stewards. It's difficult to gain an understanding of agriculture when our only contact with food is rows of standardized packaged food products.
So I keep saying I'd love to see the day they'd close the grocery stores for 3 days and then see how much attention people would pay to agriculture.
I'll tell you one thing, if it ever gets to where we don't have all these luxuries and these people have to go back out and plant a garden and raise what they got to have to eat, there'll be a lot of them go hungry.
Yeah.
Most consumers are probably unaware that the wheat value, the grain value, the farm value in what they buy at the supermarket is an insignificant portion of the price that they pay at the checkout counter. You take a box of Wheaties, for example. That box of Wheaties today has about $1.50 worth of wheat in it. $1.41 it costs, $1.50 goes to the farmer. The box costs a dime.
The cost of food now reflects a great deal of subsidies built into the food system. Subsidies in the form of large-scale irrigation in California, of low-cost energy, and the consequence of these subsidies is the fact that prices are less than they might be.
To offset the low prices farmers receive from many of their crops, the federal government has traditionally encouraged increased production through commodity price supports that are based on yield per acre. These programs favor intensive operations and larger farms. Another answer to the problem of low profits for farmers has been to increase production of cash crops such as corn or wheat for export markets. Approximately 1/2 of current U.S. crop and livestock production is exported.
We have a very aggressive farm program right now that is increasing our exports to the dismay of our foreign competitors.
International markets can't offer security for American farmers because they are too unpredictable. They fluctuate, and ultimately people throughout the world want to be self-reliant in food primarily. They want to be able to feed themselves.
In response to export policies that encouraged greater production, Midwestern farmers invested heavily in more machinery and chemicals and plowed up more land. When the export market fell, many families found themselves deeply in debt.
The U.S. farmer is in debt over $200 billion. The logic of that debt that says I got to do anything I can to get the money to pay the bank off is forcing a lot of farmers who know better, who value the land and the resources that they're dependent on, to do things that are non-sustainable.
Our national agricultural policy is based not on the needs of farmers, not on the needs of consumers or taxpayers, and not on the needs of our environment, but instead are based on the interests, very special interests, of a narrow segment of our food economy, which are the processors, the big shippers, the conglomerates, the brokers, and the speculators. These are people, in my view, who couldn't run a watermelon stand if we gave them the melons and had a highway patrol flag down the customers for them.
So we have a very expensive system of agriculture, which the government has promoted through taxes, through credit, through the commodity programs, through research programs. And now when the system starts to collapse, people stand back and say, oh, well, that's the problem of those individuals. Those individuals were just working within a structure that was set by other people, not by themselves.
Energy-intensive agriculture is not good for farmers financially. Neither is it good for their health or for the health of their land.
We're now applying about 1 billion pounds of pesticide to our land annually in the United States, somewhere between 4 and 5 pounds of pesticide per person. There are about 45,000 human pesticide poisonings in the United States annually, and anywhere from 35 to 50 deaths.
Spraying the beans with Roundup kills the weeds, but not the beans. Got them little handguns and one little squirt on each weed. That's all it takes. 4 riders, and each rider takes 2 rows. And up and down the field we go.
Crop protection chemicals are toxic because they are designed to be that way.
I used to take and farm with quite a bit of 2,4-D until I started getting sick.
We feel that just by the simple attention to personal hygiene, wash the hands, wear protective clothing. If there is a respirator required, make sure you wear the respirator, the goggles or the face shield for eye protection against splashes, the rubber apron in case you have a spill when you're mixing or this type of thing.
Working with chemicals, well, my body became sensitive to these toxins, to these poisons, to the point where I couldn't function as a farmer. I came across a grape grower who had been a pest control operator and who told me he couldn't eat his own grapes. Is it possible that I can't eat my own oranges?
Our losses due to insects, according to the United States Department of Agriculture, have increased from 7% to 13%. In other words, we've had almost a doubling in our crop losses due to insects, while at the same time increasing the use of insecticides by 10-fold.
The impact of agricultural chemicals on human health is spreading beyond the farm, as more and more of these chemicals find their way into the nation's streams and groundwater.
Across the state, more than 100 cases of measurable pesticides in water supplies have been found to date. For nitrates, many wells that had excellent water 20 or 30 years ago now consistently exceed federal safety standards. All told, experts say at least 25% of all Iowans are drinking some form of contaminated water, as many as 785,000 people.
We have to rely on chemicals because the sophistication of mechanization requires that we have to have weed-free cotton. We have to have weed-free soybeans and corn if we're going to have the harvesting efficiency.
The only thing that these perfectly weed-free fields provide is a nice, healthy profit for your chemical companies.
Chemical fertilizers, notably anhydrous ammonia, have increased plant yields. Yet at the same time, they have had a detrimental effect on soils.
It takes organic matter and living organisms in the soil to be good, healthy soil. Put all these chemicals on, it takes and kills all the soil microorganisms, so then you just got dirt. You don't have good, healthy soil. And most of your chemicals, anhydrous ammonia is real bad.
In World War II, they used anhydrous to make landing strips. They applied large amounts of anhydrous onto the area they wanted for a runway, and this just made it solid like concrete. The same effect happens out in your field when you apply it.
It's like running water over cement. The water doesn't percolate. It doesn't go down in the soil. It just runs off.
When rainwater runs off, it carries not only topsoil but nutrients as well, which have to be replaced by still more chemical fertilizers. 1/2 of the 45 million tons of fertilizer applied annually in the U.S. is needed to replace soil nutrients lost by erosion. Erosion-related costs run upward of $43 billion a year. The push to put more land into production has also led many farmers to rip out windbreaks and terraces that had helped to stabilize their fields.
We've opened up and exposed the land to a lot of erosion again by removing the trees. It's like we have to relearn a lesson every generation or so.
The average depth of soil in the United States when we started farming, for example, was 9 inches. It now averages 6 inches. We've lost about 1/3 of our topsoil depth. But to replace just 1 inch of soil requires 500 years. It's hard to get people excited about dirt.
Where drainage is poor, irrigation can lead to a buildup of salts in the soil, eventually making the land infertile. Hundreds of thousands of acres of irrigated western farmland have already been destroyed. Because of increasing production costs and the push for higher yields, many farmers do not rotate crops or let fields lie fallow. Instead, they've turned to monoculture, growing the same cash crop in the same field year after year. Without alternate plantings to help put nutrients back into the soil, a much heavier application of chemical fertilizers is necessary. Lack of crop diversity also makes pest control harder and increases the need for pesticides.
Technology has gotten us out of some messes. Technology, though, as it has, in a sense, taken control over the human heart and mind, that technology has given us chemicals in our groundwater, chemicals in our soil. It has become more and more dependent upon fossil fuels. The technological array that we see around us, we should remember that essentially all of that technological array has accumulated during an expanding energy epoch.
As we all know, fossil fuels are a finite resource. What we have to look at is, number one, initially conserving.
Farmers now are looking for what they're calling resource-efficient farming techniques. And that's another name for sustainable agricultural techniques. They're trying to cut down on their inputs of fertilizer and pesticides and energy. And the way they're cutting down on them is with information. So if we move in that direction, we're going to be a lot more efficient economically in terms of our use of materials, our use of capitals, and our use of energy.
The Center for Rural Affairs in northeastern Nebraska has been helping farmers find energy-saving alternatives since the mid-1970s. Farmers in the Nebraska program reduced overall energy use by 17% in just the first 3 years.
What our organization decided to do was to work with a group of small to medium-sized farmers, full-time family farmers, and see if there was some way of reducing their usage of energies as a way of bringing their total cost of production down and being able to stay out here and farm a little bit longer. And they're making progress. Every year they're working to reduce the amount of energy it takes to grow the same level of crops. A number of farmers started exploring the use of conservation tillage or reduced tillage systems, where instead of working the field a number of times before they plant, they may work it just once, or in some cases they don't work it at all. They just go out and plant into the old stubble.
With the Buffalo no-till system, I just plant, cultivate it twice, and harvest it. And I'm doing just as good at weed control. I'm not using any herbicide or insecticide. I use very little fertilizer. I get all this residue on top. By next spring, when I come out here to plant, it'll be all decayed out and be ready to provide nutrients for next year's growing crop. Besides providing organic matter, and it helps hold the water. We've had 4 rains this year that have been real heavy, so I've got some soil erosion, but it's nothing like what the neighbors I've seen that have been plowing and chiseling and everything. Doing, Ann? What's the matter, Ann? The neighbors like to go up to Magnet and here and have their coffee hour every morning. I have a friend that takes and goes up there, and he says I'm the topic of conversation every once in a while, especially in the spring when everybody else is plowing, cultivating, and everything, and I'm just sitting out here waiting for the time of the year, the soil to warm up to go to work.
Our farmers that have been experimenting with composting are using the compost to replace purchased chemical fertilizers. And in that way, they're definitely reducing the amount of energy that's coming onto their farms.
This is
what we call a composter. It takes the straws and manures that we get from our livestock and agitates it so that bacteria that's in this manure can decay or process it back into plant food that the plants can readily take a hold of.
I've had as much as a 300% increase in yield on alfalfa from that compost, which is amazing.
To control insects in ways that are healthier and reduce energy use, Young and other farmers in the project have turned away from chemicals to a variety of biological alternatives.
Well, there are various options of getting around having to use as many pesticides as are currently being used. In terms of insect protection, the old concept of rotating your crops. In rotating, you break up cycles of certain insects and you reduce the chances of certain insects infesting a field.
Biological methods are being successfully used to control many types of weeds as well.
Well, this one you can still see this one worm.
Oh,
There's one there.
there's one. Yeah, there he is.
Well, this little weevil is an insect that will lay its eggs on the bottom of the blossom of the musk thistle. When the eggs hatch, the larvae come out of the eggs, eat their way up into the blossom, and they eat all the seeds out of the blossom. So they stop the musk thistle by stopping its reproduction. Every seed head we've picked this morning has got weevils in it, and there's no seeds left. These thistles have not reproduced this year. We're looking for farmers who were more into conservation and more into having a long-term view of living on the land as opposed to getting the quick profit. And our theory was that if you took those farmers with those different sets of values and you expose them to technologies that fit their value base, technologies that would help them to conserve resources as opposed to exploiting them, we were convinced that those farmers would become then the early adopters. You had a group of people who all of a sudden started realizing that they could control energy. They could control that aspect of their farm and their lives.
In recent years, the number of farmers turning to sustainable, low-energy techniques has grown significantly, reaching as much as 10% of the farm population by some estimates. Norman Freestone and his family have been using these techniques on their orchards near the foothills of California's Sierra Nevada mountains.
In about a week, we will pick these plums. You see a little break here that's still yet to come. Modern agriculture measures quality by appearance. We think the future of agriculture will be enhanced if we measure quality by how it tastes, by its flavor, and more importantly, by its nutritional content. And we are now growing for nutrition.
Freestone turned to biological controls 8 years ago, when severe health problems brought on by pesticides forced him either to give up on chemicals or get out of farming.
We are using natural predators, biological control with insects, so we aren't doing ecological injury to the environment, to ourselves, and to the soil, and to the plants. Farmer, once he gets off the chemical bandwagon, has to be astute in understanding soil fertility and being able to balance the needs of the plant. And that takes time, that takes experience, and that takes knowledge. To a farmer, there's good smelling soil and there's bad smelling soil. A good smelling soil is soil. It has its unique smell to it that I cannot really totally describe, other than it's not sweet and it's not sour, but it's unique in its odor. That's the smell. We have enhanced the life of the soil because we're feeding the soil. And that allows the soil to be more porous, more alive, to retain more water. We have found that our costs in water usage, our electrical costs, are less, considerably less, because we are watering anywhere from 30 to 50% in some situations less than we were when we were using chemicals. When you look at a farmer's budget, you see the fastest rising items on the budget are utility costs, pesticide costs, and fertilizer costs. Nature's work is our reward.
We could maintain our yields with a minimum amount of commercial fertilizer that we're utilizing today. Very, very small quantities, maybe 10% of what we're using today. We could reduce pesticide use 35 to 50% without any reduction in pest control.
Most farmers respond to somebody who's farming differently, farming without pesticides, as wait and see. Let's see if this farmer can do it. Let's see if this guy can pull it off. And if he can, why, then maybe we'll do it.
There's a few farmers in the area that organic farm.
I think a lot of the ideas would take and help the guys, the neighbors, if they knew a little bit about it.
Well, I wouldn't trade their farming for mine the last couple of years, put it that way.
But a lot of them don't want to take and know anything about it because they think that it might take and restrict the number of acres that they can farm without respect to the amount of profit they can make out of it.
So many weeds. They don't use no chemical. Well, just like here, all these weeds will be here and they go to seed. And in time, it'll probably be all right, but it's going to take a lot of work.
According to the University of Nebraska, most of the guys' production costs are running $1.50 or more, where I was producing corn for 56 cents per bushel. That's quite a savings, and I can stand to live with that for a little while yet.
All told, with a strong national commitment to energy conservation on the farm, energy costs could be cut by 50%. Yet most agricultural research by agribusiness firms is devoted to biotechnology and other high-tech projects. The federal government has not shown much leadership either. Less than 1% of the USDA's $1 billion research budget is spent on studies of sustainable farming methods that could significantly reduce production costs and energy use. Wes Jackson and his associates at the Land Institute in Kansas, looking for ways to farm with minimum energy requirements, are proposing an even more dramatic shift away from current farming practices. Jackson, a scientist and son of a Kansas farmer, uses a native grassland prairie of the Midwest as his model. The Land Institute scientists are experimenting with perennial crops that would add nutrients to the soil and naturally inhibit weeds and insects.
This prairie runs on sunlight. This prairie cycles itself. It actually accumulates ecological capital, as opposed to our cornfields and wheat fields on sloping ground that lose ecological capital. This prairie can run without introducing chemicals into the environment that human tissues have not evolved with. And so we're saying that what this prairie has to teach us about the natural integrities that have made it sustainable over a long period of time, that it's time to use those principles or those rules or those laws and have a convergence of ecology and agriculture. We're looking for the options, and we're also interested in not only a lower energy consuming agriculture, but a healthier agriculture, one that accommodates human needs, gives people an opportunity to live out their lives on the land in some responsible, healthful, meaningful ways.
Sustainable agriculture is not just about the quality of the soil. It is not just about the techniques of agriculture. Sustainable agriculture is about relationships of people to each other and people to the land. Sustainable agriculture is about protecting people, the land, and community. All of these three are the same.
There's a definite strong feeling for agriculture, for farmers, for the family farm among consumers. And I think that family farmers actually have in consumers their greatest supporters. It's only a matter of consumers translating their interest and their support for farmers into policies that can help support farmers, local farmers, not through subsidies, but through access to the food distribution system.
There are really major energy benefits to a local farmer's market because the produce is coming in from 50 to 200 miles away instead of from 2,000 to 3,000 miles away. So there's obviously, when you're talking about hundreds of tons of food coming to the city every week, we're talking about a lot of energy being consumed, not only to move that food across the country from Mexico, from Chile, from California, but we're also talking about the energy to store it. You know, a lot of the reasons I started this were selfish. My own good sense told me that there isn't good food here, there is good food in the farm, why don't we do something about it? We'll make a marriage between the city and the country. It's a very successful marriage. So this gives, one, the farmers an outlet to sell the food at all, and two, it gives them a much better price. They are now competing with the supermarket level of prices, so they are selling maybe 30% under, but it's still for them twice as much as they would get wholesale. We have been encouraging more and more organically grown food. Hall Gibson was probably our first organic farmer in the market. His farm is an old family farm that's come down through many generations.
Do you ever take expert volunteers to work on your farm?
I want to do things that don't harm others or society. I feel this way about the environment, and I feel this way about food. And so it comes naturally that I should go organically. You can make more money selling retail. Also, it's much more interesting talking to the people who actually consume the food that you sell them.
Don't worry about it.
These farms are more labor intensive and less energy intensive. That means higher employment. Higher employment means more jobs in the community. So it keeps the region's economy healthy as well. There are hundreds of thousands of people who have no access to this food even now, who need markets in their communities and could be designed in as part of urban renewal and urban development.
Well, for farmers of small and medium scale, direct marketing is really the only marketing option that they have to survive.
Gary Newhouse, a Colorado wheat farmer, has taken this one step further by doing his own processing and packaging as well. He's managed to stabilize his income and reduce overall energy use by eliminating chemicals, long-distance shipping, and large-scale processing and packaging.
When I first started telling a few people back in '82 that I was going to put in a flour mill, I had people just outright laugh at me and tell me it wouldn't work, I couldn't do it. So I decided that putting in a commercial flour mill would be the way to go, to increase the value and use just what we raise on the farm and get a higher return for what we grow. In our market research, we found that there was not another whole wheat flour that was organically grown on the retail grocery store shelf. So that's the market I aimed at. By running the flour through the flour mill, packaging the flour in 5-pound bags to go on the retail market shelf, I'm grossing back to this flour mill $12.90 a bushel, which is over 6 times market price. It gives an old farmer a lot of satisfaction to walk into the store and see something that you have grown yourself, processed yourself, and sold yourself to be setting on the shelf as organically grown stone ground whole wheat flour, setting between gold medal flour on one side and Hungarian flour on the other side.
A few supermarket chains and independent grocery stores like Alfalfa's in Boulder, Colorado, are beginning to buy from local farmers whenever possible.
We've always felt it's important to support local farmers and encourage the regeneration of local agriculture. and because we believe it's a much better product. It's fresher, it tastes better, there's a more nutritive value because it's fresher.
It tastes like real fruit, not like this overblown, you know, really big stuff that you get at the major supermarkets. It looks beautiful, but the flavor isn't there. And I find that with a lot of vegetables.
We buy from a network of a number of local growers. There's really about 35 growers we're working with on a regular basis, and on a more sporadic basis, maybe another 20, 30 again.
The consumer needs to realize is that they have an immense amount of power. They vote every time they buy something. Every time you buy your potato chips, you're voting for potato chips rather than fresh carrots or some other snack. And if they stop buying the things that are non-sustainable, we are forcing then the food system to produce food in a way that is more sustainable. Another thing they can do is produce their own food, become one of those food producers. And I don't mean go out and, you know, buy a farm or level your neighbor's house or something and put in a huge garden, but you can grow food in your backyard, side yard, on your roof, or in window boxes. 34 million Americans have got gardens. The amount of food that they are producing in those gardens has got a considerable economic impact. It's in the $7, $8, $9 billion range.
This is the 6th and B Street garden on Lower East Side. Lower East Side has the highest concentration of community gardens because there was a lot of vacant land left over from the demolition of a lot of the buildings.
It was really bad. A junkyard. All old refrigerators, old cars, and everything was piled out here. It was just like a jungle, really.
The gardens have helped to revitalize. They've been symbols of neighborhood revitalization. They kind of stick out from the rubble. Everything else is a muddy brick and gray around it, and there's just bursts of green and color.
How many people are gardening here now?
We have 116 now. This one is mine, right. Elizabeth. I has here eggplants, hot peppers, cucumbers, sweet peppers, and tomatoes. I can last year 100 jars of tomatoes. This garden been here ever since 1983.
It's a heck of a lot of work since '83.
I am the one of the first starters.
Pioneer. An urban pioneer.
Right. This was a mess, though. If you had seen it then, you wouldn't even wanted to come out here.
Yeah, I know.
In a lot of these neighborhoods, people feel relatively powerless.
Oh, yeah? This is Patricia's.
And when you can see people collectively turn a vacant lot into a garden, they begin to realize that they have some control over their local situation.
One of the big pushes that people are trying to do is to get them to look at the Lower East Side as a community and to plan the housing with the open space so that the community gardens complement new housing development and that there's housing for the poor as well as housing for the wealthy.
Very sweet, very sweet. I'll be standing right here all day eating.
What has evolved are these smaller integrated parks with vegetable gardens and flower gardens and sitting areas, which I think is important because it integrates agriculture into the fabric of urban life.
Community agriculture is also a feature of an unusual neighborhood near Davis, California. Village Homes serves as a successful working model of what suburban development could become in a more sustainable future and a world with limited fossil fuels.
We thought we could reduce at least a percentage of the energy that we use if we tried to grow the foods on the land here.
We'd provide all the vegetables and fruits and things like nuts that would be needed by the people that live here. In 1975, Judy and I decided to commercially attempt to develop a neighborhood that would conserve energy, be ecologically sound, and the idea took off. We sold houses, people moved in, and you can see today, after about 13 years, that it's just a real comfortable living area. This is kind of typical here of this small garden. People have close to their house like beans and eggplant and squash and berries, and you can see the sunflowers coming up. They have grapes and kiwi on the trellis, and then you can see the peach and plum trees over here. So everybody has what you'd call kind of an edible landscape. In fact, the kids here really roam around in bands, harvesting and grazing on whatever's ripe.
Street is out and hungry, you just go over to the tree and get something to eat. Just walk up to the tree and pick a piece of fruit, and you eat it.
The idea was to design spaces and things that would bring people together. And certainly the agriculture does that. It gives people a reason to come together.
Well, it's interesting. When you start solving the energy problem, one of not having depending on transportation, conserving energy, having more local food production, the things you would do to solve that problem also help you build a sense of community.
I sort of got sucked into it, and I enjoy it working with my neighbors really a lot. It's a friendship thing. We're all really good cooks, too. I'm not kidding you. Very, very good cooking and eating around here. So it helps to be able to walk out and get a nice, very fresh cucumber and fresh basil.
If we're going to have a society that is able to sustain itself for many thousands of years, we're going to have a much more ecological lifestyle. We have to use a lot fewer resources. We have to use the land better. And I think it's important that we look at these societies that have lasted and use what we can see from them in our own designs. And really, this has taken a lot from traditional villages throughout the world.
From this rich and arable land, we've reaped a bountiful harvest. There's no denying. But the question lingers. In return for all this productivity, have we paid too high a price? We've seen how energy-intensive farming can affect the fertility of our soil, the purity of our groundwater, the health of our farmers, the vitality of our farm communities. In short, it threatens our fundamental ability to feed ourselves. But we're not without choices as we enter a new era of reduced energy consumption.
In a very short period of time, fossil fuel-dependent agriculture has displaced the culture of agriculture, the knowledge of how to grow food well, sustainably, without heavy dependence on fossil fuels. And it is precisely this knowledge that we will need as fossil fuels run out.
The best interest of this nation are served by having a lot of people out on the land, the control of food production in as many hands as possible.
I think agriculture needs to move in the direction of producing, quote unquote, healthy food, and not look in terms of what is the bottom line, what is the least expensive way to grow food.
I'd like to take and do my part to try to preserve a healthier place for my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and anybody else that's going to want to live around here.
We can fight back. We did fight back. We won. We're still in business, and we're better off now than we were before.
Preserving and enhancing regional food systems may be our salvation in the long run.
The kind of life that we're living is more satisfying in that you're more in touch with the seasons and more in touch with your neighbors.
Our values determine economics. Economics is an explicit or an external value system. And we can change those values by saying, look, we value farmers and farm communities and land and the resources that we're all dependent on, and we can make it different.
We've got to become involved in our food economy more than just at the dinner table. The snuff dippers can't do it by themselves. We got to have the bean sprout eaters to join with us in a coalition that will support new agricultural policies geared to the farm.
If you're working on something that you can finish in your lifetime, you're not thinking big enough. Also, it's important for people to begin to think about something that goes beyond their lives.
There's a growing awareness across the country of the need for change. From producers to consumers, people are already hard at work, exploring old ideas and new approaches, developing alternatives that respect the natural environment and promise to sustain the land for generations to come. I'm Harding Carter. Good night.
This program was produced by KBDI-TV, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for this program was provided by the State of Colorado.
To purchase a VHS copy of this program, send $49.95 to Hot Wiring America's Farms, Box 427, Broomfield, Colorado 80020.